Good evening. Welcome to the Falls Church City School Board meeting. If you all will call the roll.
It's Mr. Ankuma,
Aye.
Mr. Castillo, Ms. Gill, Mr. Lawrence, Mr. Reitinger, Ms. Ward, Mr. Webb.
Here.
Thank you.
If you all join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We'll accept the motion to adopt the agenda. So moved. Is there a second? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? All right. First order of business tonight, reports and recognitions, and we will have the champions of characters.
Good evening. As you probably know, each season the teams at George Mason High School award a championship of character award to athletes. These athletes are the members of the team that most exemplify what it means to be a student athlete at George Mason. They're examples for the team of integrity, respect, responsibility, sportsmanship, and leadership. And this past winter season, we had the honor of recognizing 6 champions of character, 2 of which are not here. Unfortunately, they had prior commitments. For the boys swim team, Daniel Reinfert, and for the cheerleading squad, Marjorie Lopez. However, the other 4 were able to make some time and come in and introduce themselves to you guys, and so I'll let them do that.
If y'all want to come to the front and then just have a seat, and then as each of you introduce yourselves to us and tell a little bit about your season, and just one right after the other.
Okay. I'm Claire Trundle, and I played for the varsity girls basketball team. And this season, we made it farther than we have in the past 5 years. We played at JMU in the quarterfinals, and we worked really hard together. We learned a lot on and off the court, and we all really loved each other. We did a lot of team bonding, so I think that's what made our season so great. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Nicholas Robin Coker. I played for the George Mason High School boys basketball team. I played varsity this year. For a lot of us, it was our first year on varsity, so it was easy to. It wasn't easy, but throughout the season, we adjusted to the varsity level and the varsity schedule, and managing our time. We bonded because a lot of us have played with each other since JV or travel or when we were younger. So this year, it was just kind of like the last year's varsity team. We kind of grew up together, and we're only losing 1 senior this year. So next year, should be a bright future.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Hannah Rollins. I'm on the varsity girls swim team. And this year was special because we got a new head coach. And then it was different because we had a lot of seniors that graduated last year that were very good, but we all came together and we won all 3 of our regular season swim meets, and then we placed 5th in the states at the states championships, and we all bonded really well, the underclassmen and the upperclassmen, and we're looking forward to a great season next season.
My name is Brian Villegas. I wrestle for George Mason High School. This is my 2nd year doing wrestling. This season was a really good season to me because I got to go to states as my 2nd year as a wrestler, which is really good to me. Our team is a really good team. Everyone works hard every practice. Everyone do his best, and we hope do the same thing next year. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And if you all would come up here and join us in front of the desk, and we can take a picture.
Second is stomach. Thank you so much.
Thank you all very
dude.
much. Congratulations.
Well done.
Next up, we will have a presentation for the George Mason High School Air Quality Report. And if Mr. Padilla wants to come up and introduce us here? If you would go ahead and
Yes.
introduce our guest.
Hi, I'm Sepi Padilla. I'm going to introduce Nan Koshik and Samuel Norton from PSI. They did our air quality study for us, and they're going to explain the methodology and their results.
Good evening. Thank you, Seve. My name is Nand Kaushik. I'm with PSI. PSI is a large international company. We're part of the Intertech Corporation, and we have offices all over the country, all over the world, for that matter. I'm here in the Fairfax office, and we worked with the City of Falls Church for many years, helping them with a variety of environmental services. I am the manager of the Environmental Services Department at PSI. And I just want to say a little bit about PSI. I mean, PSI itself has been, doing, for the last 35 years, we've been doing, a lot of environmental services, a lot of industrial hygiene, indoor air quality work. There was some statistic that we used to put out that we've done about maybe almost, 50 million square feet of building space. We worked and done a lot of, indoor air quality. So when we got this request from Seve a couple of months back, we were told that there was some indoor air quality issues needed to be addressed in the George Mason High School, and so we put together a team of specialists, including people from within PSI who have more than 40 years of experience in this business, and came up with a plan to do a baseline indoor air quality study. The idea was to just conduct some testing in there to get a general idea of the air quality inside the building, and get an idea of the concentration of certain parameters that are key to determining if you have some issues within the building or not. And this is typically done when there's no studies of such sort that may have been done in the past. And so that's why it's called a baseline study, because we didn't have any information previously on what the indoor air quality was done. So we did a indoor air quality study that consisted of developing some information about certain comfort parameters. I'll let my colleague Sam Norton, who was involved in the study, speak a little bit more about the details of what the study was and how we conducted the study. But again, I want to say this was a baseline study just to get a perspective and idea about the air quality issues, and we analyzed for certain parameters that are key, that are they're called comfort parameters, and we also looked at some other issues that can be a problem within a building, and you certainly want to take a look at that to eliminate those as possible bad actors that can affect the indoor air quality of the building. Okay, so I'll let Sam Norton, my colleague, he's going to explain a little bit about what exactly we did and the procedures for doing it.
Hi, I'm Samuel Norton. I'm a project manager with PSI. Nand is my direct boss. I just wanted to go over some of the things that we did and our sort of our mindset in doing this doing this study. So, as he mentioned, we did some baseline parameters, which included temperature, carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, and relative humidity. And those are parameters that usually cause, if they're not at the right levels, can cause some issues with people. Some other things we did, we looked for mold as well. We did a visual survey looking for any mold that was growing on walls. We did some air samples to see if there were, see if there were mold spores in the air. And then we also did some testing for typical volatile organic compounds, and that's a very long list, but includes things like benzene and other hydrocarbons, and that's why it's called total volatile organic compounds. Generally, these tests are done using pumps of some sort or handheld devices. In the case of comfort parameters, you use a hand check system, which basically just gives you direct readings. You stand in an area, you let the numbers balance out, and then you record what numbers are found. For total volatile organic compounds, you set out a canister, which basically is a negative pressure system, which basically collects air over a 4-hour period. Once that 4-hour period finishes, the system basically shuts off. It goes from a negative 30 to 0. It basically pulls air in, and then once that time's up, it's up. We use pumps to collect particulate matter to determine. We set these up in select classrooms throughout the facility just to get an idea of what's going on throughout the school. The classrooms we picked were designed to be representative of certain areas of the building. We obviously couldn't do every single classroom, especially not with the canisters. I tried to go into as many of the classrooms with the hand checker as possible, but with the canister equipment, we only had a certain amount, so I tried to do it in a way that would cover ground as effectively as possible. Yes. So generally speaking, results were fine. For instance, with mold, you're always going to find mold to a certain degree in indoor environments, even if it's an entirely clean facility. So, as an example, we were doing air testing at one of the hospitals in the area, and we were testing one of their surgical rooms, and they were looking specifically to find, is there any mold at all? And I think we found 1 or 2 spores, and we said, even in the cleanest of places, you're always going to find at least some. Now, when it comes to mold, there are particular types that are molds of concern. So you've probably heard of the term black mold. That's a species called Stachybotrys. It's the one that causes respiratory issues, other things like that. And we didn't find any of that in any of the samples. So that's good. And all the molds that we found were ones that you would typically find also in an outdoor environment as well, because even the best HVAC system can't filter out everything, and you're always going to find mold in a very small concentration, even on very cold winter days. As far as the comfort parameters, everything was within normal ranges. Though I will say, I did this the day before Thanksgiving, so generally speaking, factors like carbon dioxide would be higher if there were a lot of students in the building. If you have a large mass of students walking by you, that's definitely going to spike your carbon dioxide readings along with temperature. But generally speaking, the results, there was nothing out of the ordinary. Like, there wasn't a room that was exceedingly hot or exceedingly cold. The humidity was all where it should have been.
Okay. Thank you very much. Are there questions? Mr. Nkuma?
So I'm not sure this is for you or for Mr. Padilla, but there seemed to be a problem classroom or two. Were those tested, or the air quality, the one that had some sewer-like smell? And I don't know if those were part of that test.
I'd have to look in his report to see if that actual room was looked, because there was a lot of room. But that smell was a little slightly different from what we were testing for.
Okay.
We were looking for mold and things like that, and that's not really what that was.
Okay.
Other questions? Mr. Lawrence?
How often should tests like this be made? I mean, you said you didn't have a baseline, so obviously we didn't have something that you would have wanted. But what is the standard for going back and just making sure? I mean, to be honest, we're hoping we don't have this building much longer, but assuming we do, what's the standard?
That's a good question. Once you do a baseline, we recommend, at least once a year, to go back and redo it. However, that's just a rule of thumb. If there's been significant changes, within the building. For example, if the number of students have doubled in population, or if you've added some new HVAC units. So if you have any significant improvements or significant events that have happened, then you might want to do it a little sooner, maybe once every 6 months. But generally speaking, after you do the baseline, you want to do it once every year.
Other questions? Mr. Castillo?
I guess there's a question both for PSI and Mr. Padilla. The recommendations are fairly brief, basically saying rebalance the airflows and look at things from time to time. I assume that was something that was already going on at Mason, but has anything changed as a result of this report, or is it steady as she goes?
Well, it's actually something I was telling them earlier. Our HVAC systems over the years, when you first install them, you always are tweaking them because you're tweaking them for comfort levels in those rooms. So we've changed things based on the complaints in a certain room. So if someone's a little too hot or a little too cold, it may be different from where it originally was or where it was originally designed to be. And that's just sort of the nature of what it is. But we haven't changed anything drastically in our programming since this, because there were no major recommendations except for just we change our filters regularly. We maintain all of our equipment regularly. So we feel pretty confident in all that.
Any other questions? Mr. Lawrence?
Sorry, just one question probably for you, Sevi. What about, I just waited till you sat down. What about the other schools? I mean, what do we do in terms of testing there?
We have not tested any of the other schools, to my knowledge. I think TJ might have been the last one, and that was before construction, just due to some issues we were having over there, 6, 7, 8 years ago. But we don't regularly test all of our facilities generally unless there's a cause that or a recommendation from the board or a requirement from the board or something to do that. We can. It's just added cost that we've just never been asked or tasked to do.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know how hard it is to get an idea as to what the cost is, but
I'm sure I can work with these gentlemen and get a proposal together and for regular testing if that's what the board would like.
Yeah. Now, I would just be curious to know what it would cost, because it's one thing to say we tested one school, that came through okay, and it's our oldest school, 60 going on 70 years, but we've got,
Well, to give you an idea, I mean, this, I think, if I'm recalling it correctly, this was around $10,000, I think, for this test. So Mary Ellen would probably not be too far off given the square footage, and TJ would maybe, so it'd be less than that for the other buildings, but probably not a lot.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I don't know about anybody else, but I would like to know because, I assume if we didn't have a baseline at Mason, we probably don't have a baseline anywhere. But, I mean, that's me. We can obviously talk about that later.
I think we'll have a conversation about it later. I would like to just getting an estimate what it would cost to do that. I think is a good starting point. But then I guess my question would be, do other schools that you know of, do they do this particular type of testing on a regular basis, or do you or potentially do the same kind of when issues arise, that's when they potentially will do the review and testing of the building?
Based on what I know just from some of the regional meetings I go to, it's very similar to us. It's kind of, if there's an issue, we test, just because this is one of those expenses that usually people are trying to spend their funds on other things and not testing unless there's a cause or concern.
Anything else? All right, thank you all very much. Thank you all for coming in tonight. All right, next we'll have public comment. In accordance with School Board Bylaw 2.30, the time for each speaker is limited to 3 minutes. Additional written statements may be submitted for the clerk for dissemination to the board members and for the record be disposition request. Our first public comment is Ms. Kuchma.
Good evening. Allison Kuchma, 813 Fulton Avenue. I wanted to come before you tonight and thank you very much for something on the agenda that means a lot to me personally, that your willingness to do a special education audit. And I really want to thank Dr. Schiller, because I really feel that it is because of his leadership and his experience coming into the district to be able to speak to the new board leadership in a way that enables us to move forward in a very important way, because the audit is direly needed. There's some very serious systemic issues in Falls Church City Public School special education, and this audit will enable you finally at last to maybe be willing to take a look at that. You know, training is not only underfunded, but we don't have anyone systemically looking at what training is needed. And we don't have that because we have had a part-time special ed director for a number of years. Funding for special education is piecemeal, as you heard in the video clip that I forwarded to you. It's a 0.2 here and a 0.6 there, and it's really disgraceful for our school district. So I really appreciate this opportunity to move forward. And I really want you to think about it. We have been funding, and this is not personal, okay? This is about children, so this is not personal, but we have been funding a full-time community outreach coordinator, while at the same time, we have a 0.2 special ed director. I mean, just think about that. And we eliminated an ILMS class at the high school a couple of years ago, and staff told me, in part, mostly because of low enrollment. Now, on the other side of the tracks in Falls Church City Public Schools, we have a full-time IB coordinator. We provide tuition so top students can go to another high school. We pay testing fees for our IB students. And we have over 25 classes at George Mason High School. There's well over 25 that have less than 15 students. So while you talk about class size, less than 15 students, and remember, each section is about a 0.2. So remember the special ed funding that you're fighting for, a 0.2 this. Each of these, I'm going to read you the sections we have, and each is a 0.2 funding. We have IB French, 14 students. IB French 4, 12 students. IB Spanish, 14 students. IB Spanish, 11 students. IB Econ, 13 students. We have drums, 9 students. Creative writing, 14 students. Guitar, 15 students. Tech drawing, 12 students. Spanish 4, another section, 13 students. Visual arts, 10 students. Visual arts, 13 students. Chemistry, 13 students. Chemistry, 6 students. Physics, 12 students. French 4 and 5, 14 students. French 5 and 6, 12 students. English 12, 11 students. These are IB classes. Math standard, 14 students. IB theater, 15 students. Theory of knowledge, 12 students. Theory of knowledge, 9 students. And this I don't hear at the school board meetings.
If you would wrap up.
I'm done.
Your time's up. Okay.
I think I've made my point. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Catherine Carsden, and I hope I'm saying your name right. If you, because I hate doing that, so that's why I was like, I think I'm butchering it.
Okay. Catherine Karstens, 322 Grove Avenue. Good evening. I would first like to say that I appreciated the board's deliberation concerning policy 9.46 in January. One of the main goals in this fight was simply bringing awareness to the board and the community about the struggles that the LASSO faces every single day due to the current cumbersome policy, and by discussing it, you all helped me to achieve that goal. That being said, simply discussing the policy was not my aim. Something I gathered from your discussion in January was that there seemed to be a fundamental misunderstanding in the role of adult advisors in my proposal. I believe that the faculty advisor, in this case Mr. Laub, who has been trained and certified in journalism ethics and is educated to instruct student journalists, should be the official co-editor of the paper alongside the student editor-in-chief. It is evident that the board does not want to relinquish the principal's role of reviewing controversial issues, and I respect that. As a result, I believe that it should be at the discretion of the co-editors of the paper to bring issues of importance to the principal. I understand that the school board wishes to introduce the JP policy as written by the Virginia School Board Association, and so I have crossed out sections I asked the board to amend and have placed my proposed revisions beneath them. I believe each of you have been given a copy. I understand it is budget season, and that is a main priority of the board and its respective parties. I have attempted to change this policy since the start of the school year, and at this point, I know you're reaching a final decision. Please take the time to review my proposed amendments and feel free to contact me with questions. It was Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis who said, "It is the function of speech to free men from the bondage of irrational fears." I understand the fears the board has, but I want the board to understand the accountability this would provide the students of George Mason with. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Ms. Goodell will pass down the document that Ms. Carson spoke of. And I just want to address Ms. Carson, just to let you know that I appreciate the time and effort that you have definitely put forward in this. It is great to see when students, as a person who loves and works in the policy and works in the governance area, to see a student take the time and effort to put effort into reading the policy, first of all, which a lot of folks sometimes never take the time to do that, but to actually come up with potential things for us to look at as possible revisions to the policy. I really commend you and potentially some of your colleagues with the LASSO who have taken the time to do this for us. We're going to be discussing this a little bit later on this evening, but this is very timely of you to provide this to us as we work with our attorney, and she works with potentially coming and do a little talking with you all about what's going on as well. I think that's going to be a really good potential way for everyone to hopefully come to a middle ground, because that's what it's all about, to find common ground with this particular policy. But I want to thank you very much for coming tonight. All right. Any other comments before we move on? All right. If not, we'll move on to our closed meeting, and if someone would read us into close, please.
Mr. Chair, pursuant to the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, I move that the board convene a closed meeting for the following purpose: to discuss or consider the identified subject matter. Personnel under Section 2.2-3711A1, in particular, staff appointments, staff reassignments, staff resignations, staff retirements, staff performance, staff change in position, child care leave, medical leave, EPED assignments and resignations, advisory committee appointments and resignations, certain contractual matters pertaining to a specific management employee, and discussion, consideration of prospective candidates for employment, specifically superintendent, and student matters under Section 2.2-3711A2, in particular, interrupted residence and non-resident tuition student.
Thank you, Mr. Cadillo. Mr. Nkuma, second.
Mr. Nkuma?
Aye.
Mr. Castillo? Ms. Gill? Mr. Lawrence? Mr. Reitinger?
Yes.
Ms. Ward? And Mr. Webb?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. All right, if someone could certify to close.
Whereas the Falls Church City Public School Board has convened a closed meeting on this date pursuant to an affirmative recorded vote and in accordance with the provisions of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, and whereas Section 2.2-3711B of the Code of Virginia requires a certification by this school board that such closed meeting was conducted in conformity with Virginia law. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Falls Church City Public School Board hereby certifies that, to the best of each member's knowledge, only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirement by Virginia law were discussed in the closed meeting to which the certification applies, and two, only such public business matters as were identified in the motion convening the closed meeting were heard, discussed, or considered.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Nkuma. Ms. Goodell?
Aye.
Castillo?
Aye.
Ms. Gill? Mr. Lawrence? Mr. Reitinger?
Yes.
Ms. Ward? And Mr. Webb?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. We'll move to the consent agenda and ask for a motion for approval of the consent agenda. for unanimous consent of the consent agenda? If objections, so move. All right, we're going to move on to business actions and information on the agenda. And first up is 7.01, and that is textbook adoption. And I believe it's Ms. High will be this.
Good evening. I'm glad to have with me tonight Jennifer Jason, who is a mathematics teacher at George Mason, as well as a department chair for the mathematics department. Jen is going to be sharing with you tonight information regarding textbook adoption for IB courses as well as AP courses. I'll turn it over to Jen.
Hi, good evening. The current textbooks we're using were adopted in 2009. Since then, both the IB and the AP curricula have been updated. An update in materials to reflect these changes is necessary, and we would like to implement the books that we are requesting for next school year, so we would use them next year. Various IB, HL, IB, SL, IB studies and AP calculus books were reviewed from numerous companies. There's a list attached to the document you have in the board docs. These books were reviewed by a committee of teachers who are currently teaching these courses and who are familiar with the updates to the curricula. Books were selected based on unit progression, variety of exercises at many different levels, depth of explanation of examples, and compatibility with the curriculum updates. The calculus teachers decided it would be best for the AB and BC classes to use the same new book rather than selecting two different calculus books in order to facilitate flexibility for students that maybe need to switch courses. So the books that we decided for the IB courses, and this is for the HL, the SL studies, and the mathematics studies. So there are 3 IB courses right now, and we decided that Pearson was the book that we felt fit the criteria that we looked at the best. And then for the AP calculus course, the book that we chose was Single Variable Calculus, Early Transcendentals by James Stewart, and that's the 8th edition. These updated materials incorporate recent changes in the IB and AP syllabi, reflect updates in technology and the way that mathematics courses are being impacted by technology, specifically graphing software and CAS calculators, which is computer algebra systems. The IB materials will help students be more successful with the IA process because these books provide more support and guidance through the process than did previous materials. These new materials will help Mason maintain an instructional program that continues to reflect the intent of the IB and AP curricula. And these materials also provide more online resources than previous materials, allowing students greater access to course materials. So you have additional information on the books that we chose. The textbooks that we would like to purchase have been on display for public review in the GMHS main office since February 27th. They were just taken down today. As previously stated, we would like to implement the use of these books next school year. So the IB textbooks, which include HL Mathematics, IB SL Studies, and IB Mathematics Studies, we chose Pearson because there's an entire section in these textbooks that helps guide students through the internal assessment, which is the most difficult part of the course for most of our students. This book also explicitly incorporates strands of the theory of knowledge curriculum into the mathematics curriculum, and this is one of the areas that Mason needed to improve upon according to our IB audit a few years ago. There are more examples in these textbooks that show a wide range of difficulty levels, and this provides greater accessibility to the curriculum for more of our students. The book also displays how to use the technology, specifically graphing calculator with diagrams. It incorporates current technology students are using and explicitly teaches them how to use it. There is extensive website support, an online ebook, and students have access to worked out solutions, which is very helpful with the higher level mathematics courses. For the AP, AB, and AP BC calculus courses, which is the advanced placement, we went with the Stewart book because this book is widely used in colleges and other high schools to teach calculus. It is on the College Board's list of textbooks that meet or exceed the resource requirements for advanced placement, AB and BC calculus. It's also aligned to the learning objectives and skills in the course curriculum framework. It allows teachers to continue teaching calculus after the AP exam because it contains additional topics that are not part of the AP curriculum but are a part of many college calculus courses. Most chapters have an applied project or projects which can be used as catalysts for IAs or classroom enrichment, and in the case of the BC Calculus course, it is the first year of HL, which is the IB course, so that's a nice thing for kids to have when they start thinking about what they want their IA topic to be. These projects also provide real-world meaning to the mathematics that the students are learning. There is website support as well for the calculus books, an online ebook, and electronic teacher resources for creating differentiated assignments. So there's a big picture. That's what I have for you, if you have any questions.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Mr. Castillo?
Thank you, Ms. Jason, and thank you for all the great work that you do at George Mason in math. A question. Flipped classes and math, is that something that's under consideration? And if so, why? If so, why not? And how do these textbooks fit into that or do not fit into it?
So that was not our consideration when we were selecting these books. Right now we have the High C program, which I think addresses that because they do the hybrid, which is part flip and part not. I think that's a completely different issue. With these higher level math courses, I think a lot of support is necessary. I think to do an exclusively flipped class would be rather difficult, but that's just my opinion. That is not something that we investigated as a committee as we were going through these textbooks.
Mr. Lawrence?
Okay, Justin's question was a lot more sophisticated than mine. I'm just very practical. You said ebooks are available, so that means the full books are online completely, right?
Yes. However, Pearson, when you purchase books from them, they it's a two-in-one deal, so they don't sell one or the other. When you purchase the textbook, you automatically purchase the ebook, so it's a package. So the kids will have a hard copy of a textbook, and they will also have electronic access, which we found this year with our statistics textbooks. We tried to go only electronic, and that did not work at all. We ended up retroactively going back and purchasing the textbooks. So I think it is important to kind of learn from our experiences this past year that it is nice for the kids to have the hard copy of the book. They end up staring at the screen so much that the book is a nice thing to have from time to time.
Oh yeah, no, I think having the hard copy, take it home, let it sit at home, but yeah, hard copy is
Exactly,
good.
then they've got the computer for when they're at school, they can still access everything. Exactly.
Right, so they will be doing online updates, or is math the sort of thing where they don't update as much as they might other kinds of books?
That's a good question. I would have to ask the representatives for the companies that I'm talking to. So this is a new iteration. The last time we adopted textbooks, the electronic version of the textbook was a PDF of the textbook, which of course is interactive and doesn't get updated.
Right.
So in terms of my experience with electronic textbooks and what I've been able to use in my classroom based on what we have as a district, I haven't been able to work with things that are being updated. Now, based on what I looked at from the company, the Stewart Company, which does the calculus, they have WebAssign, they have all of these interactive pieces, which it seems to me like if there's an error, if there's something wrong, somebody should be able to notify the company, and that should be able to be fixed immediately. So I don't know, but I'm assuming they would provide updates.
Okay, and when you say you get 2-for-1, you get the electronic, is that in perpetuity? It's not a license where after 2 years?
No, so it's a 6-year license, and 6 years seems to be kind of the standard for most textbook companies. So after 6 years, we could keep the textbooks, but then we would have to renew the electronic licenses, and we could pay for those on their own.
Okay, and you said this was the first time since 2009?
Yes.
So that would be, I mean, it's a little over the 6 years.
Well, we're past the 6-year mark at this point.
Okay, great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Ankoma?
So high school math is way above my pay grade, but what is a flipped math?
The flipped classroom is when kids are getting content delivered to them at home via video. So instead of me lecturing to the kids, they would watch the lecture at home via video, and they would come to the class, and I say, okay, now let's work problems. So they would be working the problems in the classroom environment with the teacher. Now in my classroom, I already do that a lot. When there's a topic that's pretty easy and I don't think they're gonna have questions about, I'll have them watch the videos, and then we'll do the problems in class. If there's a topic that's very complicated and they're gonna have questions, I lecture so that we can have an interactive lesson, and then they do the practice at home.
Okay.
Any other questions? Mr. Castillo?
I'll just ask one more question that's, what's changed over the last 9 years? I mean, I joke to my kids that you'd think after all these years we would have figured out how to teach math and all these other subjects. What is the evolution of these textbooks?
I think technology is having a dramatic impact on the level that kids are able to reach. And you can see this in kind of the change in the AP tests over time. So last year, or before 2011, the AP test used to be half calculator and half no calculator, and now they've kind of gone back to about 2/3 no calculator, 1/3 calculator, because the kids got so good at using the technology that all of the scores with the calculator were much higher. So they've kind of rebalanced that a little bit. However, the pieces where the kids are allowed to use technology, they are able to ask students questions that are of the engineering level. So these aren't actually math problems you could do by hand. You need a calculator to do them. However, conceptually, they can test students' understanding because students are unable to actually even use the technology to solve the problem unless they conceptually understand how to do the problem. So it's a really interesting balance of how to use technology. And for example, in my classroom, I'm able to do some really, really amazing dynamic displays of what this math we're talking about means because I have all of this technology at my fingertip that actually is animated and students can see what's going on. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. Okay.
Any other questions? If not, thank you very much for your presentation. As I always let everyone know, math and me have never really been friends from my college days to now.
Don't tell your kids that, though. Never admit it.
I would never tell them. We'll figure it out. And if I couldn't figure it out, we'll figure someone else to help you along the way. But thank you very much. So with that, I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair, I move that the school board approve the adoption of the following textbooks for GMHS Mathematics 2017. IBHL, Higher Level Mathematics, Publisher Pearson, copyright 2012. IBSL, Standard Level Mathematics, Publisher Pearson, copyright 2012. IBSL Studies, Mathematical Studies, Publisher Pearson, copyright 2013. AP Calculus, Single Variable Calculus, Early Transcendental, Stewart 8th edition, Publisher, Sinaj Learning, copyright 2016.
Second. Okay. All those in favor, please vote aye. Aye. Opposed? All right. Thank you very much. All right. We're going to move on now for first reading of policies, and I will turn this over for Dr. Schiller for introduction.
Next month is Child Abuse Awareness Month, and we wanted to outline 4 areas to bring to your attention. One is that at the next board meeting for April. Oh, I'm so sorry. I moved in the wrong direction. We'll go back. Rewind. Very pleased to bring to your attention first reading of policies. Chief Legal Officer Patricia Minson has been working diligently on these, and with the outline that we had presented to you of how we'd review each of the policies into sections. And at this point, I will turn to her.
Good evening. For the policies, they're available online, the draft policies that are based on the VSBA policy. The color that's currently available on board docs. Anything that is in red is an addition to the VSBA model policy, whether it's changing our name to make sure that it's personalized for our division, or adding language from our previous policy that, in working with Dr. Schiller, and since we're talking about personnel policies, also worked with Ms. High, language that we thought we wanted to propose to the board keeping in. If you have questions about any of that language or anything in the policies, now for the first reading is the time to really dive into that. Because we're moving in an organization system from our policies, which are numbered and lettered, to the VSBA model policies that are lettered, as much as possible, I've included in green what the future policy is, in blue what the previous policy was, after we do a full adoption of all the VSBA model policies and then move over to the new VSBA system, our policies that are Falls Church specific. The plan is to then entirely remove all of the blue font, and all of the green font will be references to the current policy, so we'll take out the future policy reference, and then there will be a consistent way to search the policies and the regulations. The other helpful thing about the VSBA model policies is they have a table of contents and 3 different ways of indexing the policy. So once we get to the full VSBA model policy, not only, as we've discussed in previous meetings, will it be easier to update as the law changes, but there's also a way of reviewing those policies and finding the policy you're looking for that hopefully will be convenient for you all, for the community, for students, for teachers. With that introduction, I would propose starting with the personnel policies of GA.
Ms.
Minson, could I just interrupt and ask, what do these letters stand for?
That's a good question. The VSBA policies are structured A through I believe. The G policies all have to do with employment matters. One of the policies in here is JP. That's for student publications. The J section is for student section. I have in my office, and I should have brought it, I didn't bring with me, a 3-ring binder about 8 inches thick of all the VSBA policies. That includes the index of how they're indexed with letters and how they're organized. It's a little difficult for me to explain it to you, but I'm also happy to bring that to the next board meeting or for you to stop by my office and I can show you the organization system that the VSBA uses.
Because I got to say, I know we'll get through this, but it's pretty daunting. And the other question related to that is, my understanding is a fair number of our policies are in addition to or major departures from VSBA. If and to the extent that's true, will we just give them a corresponding letter and some other designation of our own?
Yes, we'll decide which section they fit in, and then within each section, which path it seems to match. All policies have at least 2 letters of the VSBA policies. Some have 3 letters and other subsections to it. So all the policies and regulations will have a letter that corresponds with a section that we then will index ourselves as to where it makes sense. So when I bring to the board policies that are Falls Church specific policies, in addition to reviewing the language of the policy, updating the law, making sure that this is the policy language as we want it, it'd be up for the board to decide, do we want to reorganize this? Where would we want it to go in? One thing that I think is helpful in the VSBA policies, and one of the policies we have before us today, policy GEA is also JOH. That's the acceptance of electronic signatures. So we accept electronic signatures from our staff members. GEA is the codification of that. We accept from students, JOH. So there's cross-references if the policy relates to students and teachers, for example, or personnel and school boards. So we can, under this designation system, if it's something that fits into more than one category, it can be cross-referenced in both, and easier to find for us once we think of a good place to put it, but we do need to give some thought and planning into where it might belong. So it's not as easy as just accepting all the VSBA policies, which we knew before, but now that I've done a dive into it, it's going to be some fun work to work through together. And you look forward to that, don't you, Mr. President?
I can't wait.
Great. Anything else generally as far as the policies, or do we want to do a first reading, starting with the personnel policies, JA? Okay, so on board docs is policy JA. That would be GA. Thank you, Ms. High. That's taken from our previous policy 1.8. Our policy 1.8, if you pull it up on our website, is quite long. It talks about wanting to make sure that we have high-quality personnel. The first paragraph would be fully removed, and that just says the policies here are for the purpose of initial and continuous employment. It's not legally necessary. It's prefatory language. The second paragraph of our policy 8.1 talks about the responsibility of the superintendent for the appropriate recruitment and staffing. That's already reflected in VSBA policy GBN, so we wouldn't be losing that language. It would just be moved to another policy. The third paragraph of our policy 1.8 is word for word what the VSBA model policy is. And the fourth paragraph saying that the policies will be updated as required by the Virginia Code is something that we're required to do by law but doesn't need to be included in the policies. So the short version is file GA as proposed by the VSBA is one sentence that the goal of employment policies and practices of the Falls Church City School Board is to promote the employment and retention of highly qualified personnel to effectively serve the educational needs of students. Any questions about this policy?
I'll just, it seems to me as a global matter, we could define Falls Church City School Board as school board and cut out 3 words per every policy. And I assume the English department's okay with a split infinitive? To effectively serve?
Mm-hmm. The English department of the Virginia School Board
I'm just saying.
happy to change that, and happy to take out Falls Church City consistently if that's what the board would like. That would save me some changing font color and size. In the VSBA model policies, they just have the word blank. I can remove blank and it can just be school board. We need to make sure that that's clear, though, in the initial policy and definition section. So that's something that I need to propose to the board at the next reading.
Mr. Reitinger?
So just a couple of things. First, I don't really think I have a dog in the fight of whether it says school board or Falls Church City School Board. I'm not sure the differences matter that much. I would take Mr. Castillo's tongue-in-cheek comment, which I'm sure is a tongue-in-cheek comment. I think we should go out of our way to not make changes, even if there are some technical grammatical issues. The whole point of this exercise to me is that we want to have different policies only where our needs and operations require it, because that way we don't have to, it minimizes the amount of work. And so although, one could easily keep the split infinitive or get rid of the split infinitive and track it, I would generally like to say, if we're talking about making any change with the standard policies, does it really need to be there or can we not? Because, as I said the first time we talked about this, not all the children are above average. Not everything we do is unique. So it's better to stick with the standard proven policies statewide where they work well.
The only other addition I didn't mention in regard to the policies generally, right now it says adopted and there are 2 lines. After second reading, upon the adoption, the date of the second reading and the date of the adoption would then go in there. So it would, if we have our second reading of these policies on April 18th, the date under adopted will be April 18th, 2017 for these 8 policies or for whichever of these policies go forward, and we would do that going forward. So we would be clear of what we've revised when. If there aren't other questions on file GA, I would recommend that move forward to second reading at our next school board meeting.
I would just keep going and don't.
Yeah, I was just going to say,
Okay. GCCB is the next one. That's employment of family members. If you compare that policy, to our previous policy, it's 3.8. It's virtually word for word, the same as our previous policy had been, with removing one sentence after the first paragraph. We've also added in our own language as recommended by Lisa Hyde, Dr. Schiller, and Hunter, that you can see it's highlighted in red at the second to last paragraph, that the prohibition of employment of a family member in the same school division or department is not permitted. That's something that has come up in the past and has been recommended. I do notice that I have an error. I say pin the same department, so I would make that change for the second reading. Are there any other questions about this policy or changes that have been proposed?
Should we just start talking, or?
If you have questions, that's all, Mr.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Mr. Lawrence.
Okay, my only question is, in the second line where it talks about any family member of the superintendent or of a school board member, that is sitting school board members, right? It doesn't go back?
That's true, yes.
Okay.
So if someone is elected as a school board member and the person is currently on staff as an employee, that does not impact their employment. And that's statutory through the Virginia Code.
No, I think that answers a different question. What I mean is that only applies to family members of people who are on the board now.
Who are newly hired, yes, that's correct.
Right, but
He's asking if there's a former school board member, would their family member be able to
Right.
work for the school after they're off the board?
They're no longer a school board member, so yes, they could,
Okay, so by saying school board member, that means sitting in office currently?
yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Castillo?
But if there were somebody running for school board now, and there's somebody on the staff now, this, as structured, would not allow that, is that correct? With the addition of it was employed by the school board at any time prior to June 10th?
As long as the spouse or family member is employed pursuant to a written contract prior to the appointment of the school board member, that would not impact the employment. The family member would stay on contract, they'd still be an employee. The purpose of this is to make sure that any current superintendent or any school board member doesn't have a preference to their family member being hired once they're in a position of the hiring position, once the school board employs someone.
Okay, but, so it says this prohibition, I'm sorry if I'm missing this, but it says the prohibition does not apply, the third line, does not apply to the employment, promotion, or transfer within the school division of any family member who, and then you go down to the third bullet and says was employed by the school board at any time prior to June 10th, 1994. So as I read that, if somebody were employed by the school board after June 10th, 1994, and somebody who was running for school board now becomes elected, that would be, there would be a problem with that arrangement.
Under the first paragraph, though, has been employed pursuant to a written contract with the school board or employed as a substitute teacher or teacher's aide by the school board prior to the taking of office of the superintendent or any school board member.
But it's or, so each of the bullets stands separately. If it's additive, if you have to hit all three bullets, that's different.
Give me
No,
one moment.
I don't think that's right, Mr. Castillo. If any of the three apply because of the or, then there is no problem. So you have to meet the first bullet, the second bullet, or the third bullet.
Right. I thought Ms. Minson was suggesting that they were cumulative, or there was an and there. Maybe I'm
But that's to say
misunderstood.
that my understanding of reading this, which could be wrong, is that if a person is currently employed by a written contract with the school board, and they are related to a person who is then elected, that is not barred because of the first bullet. And you don't have to worry.
Okay, got it.
The other thing I just realized, the reference to Virginia Code 2.23.119 is word for word out of the Virginia Code. So if we wanted to change this, we'd want to go to the legislature to ask them to clarify the language.
Okay, great, thanks.
And I only say that, I don't mean that to be flip. We can say whatever we want in our policies, but we can't supersede the Virginia Code. So if our policies don't align with the Virginia Code prevails, even if we think our language is better.
I'd be shocked that Virginia code is not drafted transparently in every case.
Okay, any other questions on that policy? The next policy is policy CF, which is school building administration. That correlates with our previous policy 8.7. This is a change in our structure. Falls Church City Public Schools had previously appointed the superintendent, and the superintendent was authorized to offer employment to all other personnel. The Virginia Code was changed, and our policies as of now do not reflect the change in Virginia Code 22.1-293A. So the additional language of school building administration for this file is that the school board employs principals and assistant principals, and then the principal provides instructional leadership, and the principal submits recommendations to the superintendent for the employment of all personnel who are not principals or assistant principals. So even though our previous policy didn't reflect that language, the new policy reflects what the Virginia Code requires.
Keep rolling.
No more
Well,
questions
actually,
on that.
just-
Next policy, you all are
Sorry,
doing.
one question on CF.
Certainly.
Sorry. Does that need to be cross-referenced with our 8.18 GCI? I mean, there's overlap to me, and you've got a bunch of cross-references underneath that just seemed logical.
Cross-reference to which one, I'm sorry?
To GCI, the 8.18, professional staff assignments and transfers. And that could just be a question for later.
Let me make a note of that.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else on CF?
Go ahead and continue.
Next is GCDA, that's FCCPS former policy 8.6, the effect of criminal conviction or found in complaint of child abuse. I anticipate questions on this and did want to share with you some of the changes in language. The structure of the new VSBA policy is very different than our previous one with different headers and some language changed and removed. For example, our current policy is written to require applicants to give information about charges that have been filed against them, including those related to obscenity and drug offenses. That's something that, at least as of today, we do not ask as part of our employment processes. So including that in the language of the policy doesn't make sense if that's not a practice that we use. There are code references on in our old policy to our policies instead of the Virginia Code, which I think is a mistake. I think the new policy does cover that. As far as the one question for the board, there's a choose your own adventure, option 1, option 2, and option 3 of whether the board wants the potential employer applicant to pay the cost of fingerprinting, criminal records check, and abuse and neglect check, whether the school board will pay that or whether you want to split that cost. Under the policy as it's currently written, our policy is that the school board pays for that. I think it's a matter more of logistics and of budget that's squarely in your court. It's not a legal question, it's a political question of how you all want to process that. I did anticipate the question would come out how other divisions handle this, and Lisa did reach out. As far as cost, fingerprinting cost is $30 per applicant. CPS search is $10 per applicant. Local divisions of 5, Manassas City, Alexandria, Arlington, Fairfax, and Prince William, they all do the fingerprinting, they all do the CPS checks. Only Alexandria puts that cost onto the employer for both CPS and for fingerprinting in discussing this policy to the employee. In all other cases, the employer pays. Dr. Schiller said in his experience, which has been outside Virginia, usually it is borne by the applicant and the employee. Sometimes there's an arrangement where that payment comes out of the first paycheck. So if that's something that you all want to discuss, otherwise, if you want to just choose one of the options, my recommendation is not to go with the option where it's a split cost, because there certainly are some administrative challenges of if we're going to jump through the hoops of the applicant paying for it or it coming out of their paycheck, just do that in a complete total for the full $40 rather than splitting that. So choosing one way or another, but that's certainly an option that you all could take if you want to split the baby.
Mr. Reininger?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My inclination, at least, would be to stick with the current policy and pay for that. It's not a lot of money. Good teachers are hard to find. We're always trying to recruit. Sometimes it's very difficult to get them. I don't like the optics when we're talking $40 or $50 of saying, we're glad you'd like to come for work for us, please cut us a check. My preference would be to stick with the current policy.
I agree. I've never been asked to pay for my own fingerprinting at a job, so I think I would not like to ask our teachers or anyone to pay for that.
Ms. Ward?
Given the, and it's not just for teachers, we're talking people who drive buses, people who work in the cafeteria, paraprofessionals. These people don't make a lot of money, and to ask them to, to hire them and then say, hey, pay us $40 so you can work here, it just doesn't sit well with me. It doesn't sound right. I don't like it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would think there's a fourth way, and that would be the employee, the prospective employee would pay if there's a problem. If they pass through these hoops and they're hired, they would not pay. And if they fail because they didn't fulfill a clean requirement on any of these, then they would pay that. But to Mr. Reidinger's point, the administrative hassles of doing that probably don't justify the elaborateness of that.
Any other questions?
Yep.
Mr. Lawrence?
Sorry, yeah, I've got a couple, several little ones. One, is it easy enough to have lines numbered? I'm just thinking going forward, it would be easier if we could just say line number whatever
For purposes of the first and second reading or for the policy in general?
No, just for reading, to make it easier for you to find where we have issues?
Marty told me that that would be easy. She can help me through that, yes.
Okay. Under 1A, the second full paragraph at the end, should that Board of Education, should that be school board?
No, that's the Board of Education for Virginia, for the state.
Okay. And that's understood? I mean, I clearly thought that was just, a typo, because there are some boards that are boards of education.
We could add Virginia Board of Education, but Board of Education consistently throughout the policies is going to be the Virginia State Board of Education.
Okay. In the next paragraph, we're talking about shall submit to fingerprinting and provide personal descriptive information. Is that understood what that means, or do we need to put as requested? Because it's sort of like, okay, tell us what your favorite color is. I mean, it just
For that,
seems very
I would
vague.
need to go back to the Virginia code sections that are cited in the bottom of this to see what specifically is required of that. If we were going to amend that language, I would guess that that's under one of the 22.1 sections. And I did review all those when I looked at the policy, but I do not have a copy of those printed with me now. If that's something that you want me to look into, I can have an answer for that during second reading or can follow up with you.
Okay, I'd just like to make it clear that they have to provide answers to the questions we want to ask, as opposed to just random personal information.
Lisa?
And that's pertaining to the I-9 information, Child Protective Services, and those kinds of identifications that are a part of the hiring process. So that's what that means as far as personal descriptive information.
Right, I mean, with some of these, it may just be that it's a term of art that is understood by anybody who's, in this world, and if that's the answer, then that's the answer. I'm one of the non-lawyers here, so sometimes my questions are, what does this mean in English?
And I don't have the answer to that right now, but I can get that to you.
Okay. On the second page, well, actually, the last paragraph of section A, where it talks about if an applicant is denied employment, is there any appeal there?
There's not an appeal process through our hiring system. This is a language that the Virginia Code requires that if someone doesn't pass these checks, we're not allowed to hire them, and then we're required to give them the information that they didn't pass. If there's criminal records check or child abuse checks that come back and are incorrect, that wouldn't be appealed through us, but I'm sure that there's a way of appealing that through the Virginia court system or through the Virginia Board of Education.
Okay. Okay. All right, under 2B, where it talks about founded complaints of child abuse or neglect.
Yes.
Where it talks about any employee will be dismissed. But then it goes on to, after all rights to an appeal provided by Virginia Code, blah, 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 have been exhausted. But in the meantime, we can suspend them and keep them away from our property and our kids, right?
Yes.
Okay. And the one under that, subsection 3, where it basically says if you're placed on probation, we'll treat this as conviction and guilt. That's kosher?
That's what's required by the code, but I'm pulling that up right now to see what that charge is.
And again, if you just want to make a note and get back to us for
No,
second reading.
that's a charge for relating to narcotics, marijuana, stimulants, depressants, or hallucinogenic drugs. So that provision says if an individual is on probation under these, they automatically cannot teach. So that's something that's required by the code, yes.
Okay, good, perfect. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on this policy? Is it clear from the board that we're going to be going with option 2? I'll present that when we go to the second reading. Thank you. For policy GEAJOH, the acceptance of electronic signatures, I'm happy to report that this is word for word what our policy previously said that was changed in September of 2015. So I have nothing to add unless you see that I've made any grammatical or typos.
Which one is it, I'm sorry?
Pardon? Oh, sorry, the previous policy was 8.10.
No, I'm sorry. What's the one we're looking at?
GEAJOH, the acceptance of electronic signatures. The next policy is GCI, professional staff assignments and transfers. There are two options under the VSBA policies. There's an option 1 and option 2. I went with option 1 since that's what our previous policy had been, and the language is very, very similar. There's a few tweaks in words from our policy 8.18 to this new policy. There was one paragraph that we had talking about a change of assignment during the school year, and I've added that in red into the new proposed policy after talking with Dr. Schiller and with Lisa that made sense. I also note that the Virginia Code as amended did add certain language as to when the request for a transfer is due. So that's been added, that's included in the VSBA policy and should have been in our policy initially. Any questions about this policy or what we're changing from?
Mr. Lawrence?
Just one question in the first line where it says principals and other supervisory personnel may submit recommendations. I mean, shouldn't that be shall? I mean, that's their job. It's not like it's optional to submit recommendations about the people they're responsible for. I mean, I understand it's the VSBA policy and I'm questioning something everybody's agreed to, but it just seems odd.
And you're right, shall is mandatory language saying that it absolutely must be done. The only reason I can think of why it's not done here is what if there's not an appointment, assignment, promotion, transfer, dismissal at any point in time. If a principal doesn't have any changes to their school, which conceivably could be the case, then how could they be required with shall language to submit things to the superintendent?
Okay.
This is the common form for legislative authorization as opposed to mandate. So it's just authorizing, I think, these people to be able to do it. It's standard lawyerese, John.
Yeah, no, and I've worked with a lot of legislation. It just seems odd to think that it would not happen. So that's fine.
The last personnel policy is GAH, which I really like. This is a policy that doesn't correspond with any policy we have. It is a new law that's gone into effect recently about conflicts of interest. I know each of you have submitted your conflicts of interest to through the Conflicts of Interest Act. This is just a codification of that new law, and I would recommend adopting it as written by the VSBA. And the VSBA gives us updates as the legislature changes. This is one that came up in February of this year. So there's a reason we didn't have it before and that we should have it now.
Reinger?
I just apologize for raising it. By the way, I like the policy name GA too.
Thank you.
We capitalize superintendent everywhere else. In B, the first paragraph, there's a superintendent that's not capitalized. I'm sorry.
And the second paragraph there is, and I noticed that on 2 other policies, and in school board one time I didn't capitalize it, and I am very nitpicky, so that's my mistake, and I'm going to fix that in this and all the policies. What I'll do going forward when we do second reading, anything in red I will change to black. If there's any other changes that I'm making on second reading, I'll make it in red so it's clear what changes there are, and I'll point out to you all the times I have not properly capitalized school board and superintendent, because I should have done that, and I care deeply about little nitpicky things, so I'll do that here and elsewhere, and you can laugh at how poorly I've done in the past. Last one is a student publications
Just one
policy.
question.
Oh, sorry.
This seems like a pretty, on the one hand, a pretty straightforward provision, but it's also new. Do we have a plan to provide some sort of training on this so that everybody understands what their responsibilities are under this? That seems like that would be.
We will put that on our administrative meeting agenda. So as we are continuing our in-service of all of our staff on a variety of areas of our administrative staff, we'll add this to that agenda as well, whenever there are policy changes, so that everyone's fully aware of and what implications there would be.
And we can also include it as one of our operational procedures in our staff handbook for the division.
Okay. Mr. Lawrence?
Yeah, no, that was one of my questions, because we say it's required to read it, and we didn't say how. One question is, in the second line, public school employees and officials, what's the difference? And should it always say employees and officials?
Employees would be anyone employed by the school board. The officials would be the school board.
Okay. Because down below it says school board employees are required to read and be familiar with. I mean, but we're governed, our responsibility is governed, is somewhere else, right?
Yes.
Okay, so the fact that we're not, the officials aren't down below doesn't mean anything. Under compliance, the first sentence, it just says school board employees, as opposed to employees and officials.
Yes, that does just relate to school board employees.
Okay, all right, thank
And
you.
I also noticed that there's a footnote here saying that the superintendent may want to provide information and links to accompany the policy. That's something that we will do, and we'll remove the footnote for the second reading. Any other questions on policy GA? Okay, now the last policy is policy JP, student publications. It's former FCCPS policy 9.46. This is one we had discussed at length at a school board meeting, I want to say in January, and the decision was made to go with the VSBA model policy, but to add an appeal to the superintendent. So what is present here today is precisely that, the language from the VSBA model policy and an appeal to the superintendent process by a student who does not agree with the principal's decision. Are there any questions about this policy?
Mr. Lawrence?
A couple things. In the first paragraph where it talks about literary magazines, et cetera, may be prepared in regularly scheduled classes and are components of the curriculum approved, it seems like you've got something that's optional that is automatically part of a curriculum, which seems odd if it's optional. If it's part of the curriculum, it would seem like it's non-optional, but doing these things is optional, right?
Preparing newspapers, yearbooks, and literary magazines may be prepared in regularly scheduled classes, and they are components of the curriculum.
It just seems like if they are components of the curriculum, they're not optional, but if we say they may be prepared, they don't have to be prepared, then they are. I mean, that could be another, note to make on your list of annoying things that I've been asking.
Can I ask if optional, so would electives be considered optional? They're still part of the curriculum, wouldn't they?
Well,
unless I'm not understanding it, you're saying.
we don't have to have publications. We don't have to have the school, newspapers, yearbooks. We don't have to. So the question is, if we don't have to, can we say they're part of the curriculum? I just don't understand. Is the definition of curriculum something that's by definition required?
Is this more reference to what Ms. Costins was referring to?
As far as Mr. Lawrence's question, I think Lisa wanted to.
I think because we have made it a part of our class, it has become a part of our curriculum. Not at all times, it's not necessarily a course. Sometimes it can be a club or something of that effect. So I think that's why the part of our curriculum is included in that.
I read this sentence to mean that not every class is going to involve the preparation of these sorts of things. So these activities may take place in regularly scheduled classes. If you take all of them, they do take place. And that's what the second part indicates, and are components of the curriculum approved by the school board. We do have a newspaper, we do have a yearbook, we do have things like literary magazines. There's no year we're not going to have a yearbook. So factually, it seems correct to me, and the may is because it's not every class where that's done, it's just some. So the sentence, I think, is reasonably aligned with process and fact.
And it also corresponds with our previous policy language at 9.6. That's not a reason to keep it in, but it is the same language that we've used in the past. As far as our previous policy, comparing it to this policy, the first two paragraphs of our policy 9.46 are aspirational about what the board seeks to educate young people for. It's not required language, and it has been removed. The definitions section has also been removed from the VSBA policy. The definitions are defined by case law and can change over time, so there's no need to define those in here. The official school publications provision, paragraph 2 of our previous policy, is the same word for word as is paragraph B. Paragraph C for the responsibilities of the faculty co-editor are very similar. There's about 5 words that have been changed. the responsibilities of the school principal and editor are word for word the same as our previous policy, and we're adding the appeal for the superintendent as the board has requested. Our previous policy included a section about the distribution of official school materials and of student-produced materials that weren't part of the school curriculum. That all has been removed, since that's not something that right now there appears to be a need for a policy on, but if that's something you all wanted to add back in, I could look into that.
Okay, I think Aaron had something.
No, I was
question?
just going to comment to Mr. Lawrence's question. But I read the first paragraph as a descriptive paragraph, as Mr. Reitinger pointed out, not prescriptive. Like, this is describing what publications are, and that they may be prepared. Yeah, not prescriptive as in telling you what you have to do. That's all.
Which is consistent with the header of the definitions of what are school publications. I appreciate both of you giving your legal expertise to that. I think you're right.
Okay, just 3 things, I promise. The last bullet under responsibilities of student editors, we're missing several things. Advocates prejudice, hatred, violence, harassment, race, religion, national origin, ancestry, disability, sexual orientation, gender identity. I mean, we've got a lot more in our policies overall. So we just need to make sure that everything gets included here, just like it is everywhere else.
And that actually is something that will be coming up when I present the policies that have been reviewed by OCR as part of that ongoing case. So while we haven't had that language approved, we could add that language here for the second reading, assuming they are going to be approved, or we can go back and add the language to this policy later once that new policy comes up. I'm inclined to add it now for the second reading so that it's finalized and it's consistent. And if OCR doesn't require us to have certain language, if this board still wants to protect classes that are not protected under federal and state law, that is within your authority, and we certainly can do that.
Yeah, I mean, OCR can set the floor, and then
Absolutely.
we can go above it. But yeah, I'd like to put it in now, assuming that anything we put in would meet or exceed OCR. And it's already in our other policies, I think, too. So this is, I think, making it consistent as well. And in terms of responsibilities of the school principal as the editor, we don't want to let the principal designate someone else to be able to, give this kind of approval. I mean, having the principal be the designated editor, I think, is the right organizational thing. But, if we get somebody like Mr. Laub, who's fantastic, should we say the principal can say, I will designate that person to have this authority, just to make it a little easier? I mean, I don't see what the loss would be.
I'm going to speak up, right? You're waiting.
Go ahead, Ms. Warren.
Well, a couple things on this. First of all, it seems redundant in this language. It says material that may be considered controversial by some members of the school committee should be carefully considered by students and the faculty editor and brought to the attention of the principal. It seems like that is not necessary if the principal is going to be the editor, because they're going to see it anyway. But that's just one point. The main point I wanted to make, though, is in the grand scheme of things, it's the journalism teacher who really screens this stuff in the first place. Is there any provision, or can we add a provision that will allow the principal to give that editorial position to the journalism teacher? So, the reason I ask is because talking with Ms. Karstens and other kids on school newspapers, not necessarily just at Mason, what happens when newspapers have to be approved by the principal, it delays the publication, and sometimes it can put a chilling effect on students' desire to write articles, to write freely and be creative. So I just don't have a real good feeling about this. I have to tell you all, I don't. Anyway, so can you elaborate on the?
Sure. As far as the principal being the editor, that's the guidance from the VSBA. I think that's best practice under the law, that the buck stops with the principal. The principal is going to be the one responsible for what's published in their school. As a practical matter, one thing that Ms. Karstens has raised was that Madison, I believe it was Madison High School and Marshall High School, don't have prior review and have exceptional articles and exceptional newspapers that Falls Church would want to emulate. They actually do have prior review in the Fairfax County policies. Whether the principal chooses to follow those policies and read every article initially or defers to the journalism teacher to bring that forward to the principal might be an arrangement that they have if they have a co-editor, a faculty member who's been with them for years, who they trust their judgment, who they expect. The expectation is that they would raise that to the principal. But knowing that the buck stops with the principal, it's the principal, well, it's going to come back to the school board if something is published that is defamatory or violates the law, but then it's the principal's responsibility for checking that and raising that and reviewing that. So if a principal chooses not to follow the policy or to defer to the journalism teacher, that's one thing. I do think that it's best in the policy to include the principal as the final editor, and if the principal then trusts the faculty member and is willing to put their responsibility on the line in the hands of someone else, the policy makes clear that it falls on the principal, and we're looking for the principal to provide the leadership of the school and to know what's going to be published. And that's my understanding of how things have been done in Fairfax, which is why prior review, according to the student editors of the paper, they don't bring everything to their principal, but the principal still is required to be the editor and the person who does review everything, whether or not that's a structure that they use within their journalism system.
Never works for me. So is it possible, though, to maybe add, so if I was a principal and I see this policy, I'm going to say, it is incumbent on me to review every single newspaper based on this language. Is it possible to add a sentence or two or some language that would allow the principal to designate the journalism teacher or some other person to do the review? Or would that even be wise? I don't even know.
Yeah, that was exactly my point. Could we say the school principal or his or her designee, and then if they designate and it doesn't work out well, then you rescind the designation and it falls back on you?
My concern for the school board is, in terms of protecting you all from liability, if the principal designates and thinks they're making a good choice and they get burned one time, what does that mean for liability for the school board of what's published? It might not be major. It might be.
That's fine, but I'm thinking the process is one thing. So the principal is out. God forbid he breaks a leg. He's out a few days. No newspaper.
The principals that I've worked with, even if they're out of the office, are very easily accessible by email and phone. The other thing that does speak to your point, Ms. Ward, the final sentence of the paragraph, responsibility of student publications faculty co-editor, it says material that might be considered controversial by some members of the community, the onus is on the students and the faculty editor to bring that to the attention of the principal, which is what we would want them to do. But in the event they do not bring that to the principal's attention, it still falls on the principal to know what's being published under the school's name.
So I actually wanted to just explore that a little bit, exactly what Mr. Lawrence and Ms. Ward have been talking about. It seems to me there's the only difference between what Ms. Karsten was suggesting and this policy, effectively, really the only major difference is who's the editor. And I agree with you that the principal needs to be the editor. What we're talking about now is a sort of a practice question. I don't think there's anything, and you said, if the principal wants to ignore the policy, I actually don't know that it violates the policy for the principal to defer to the student editors and the faculty editor. But this policy says you're responsible for the publication.
That's
so,
true.
What this does effectively is allow the principal the discretion to run the school. It's like, a newspaper, the ultimate editor for the Washington Post doesn't read everything that goes into the Washington Post. There's sub-editors and there's different pieces, and that's the way it works generally. And people are willing to accept certain risks based on trust that they've got. I just wanted to make clear, in my unless there's something here that I've missed, I don't think there's anything in the policy that you've written that would prohibit a principal from not necessarily reading everything, as long as he or she is comfortable with the fact that they're responsible for what gets published, even if they don't read everything.
And yes, that is the point, that they truly are ultimately responsible. But you're right, there's nothing here requiring them to read every single word of every single article. If they don't, it's on them, but they can choose not to based on their judgment, based on their relationship with the journalism faculty co-editor, with the students, with some experience. So it would be my expectation, if it's a newer principal or a newer journalism teacher, more would likely be read, or if it's a new staff at the beginning of the year, want to get an idea for what articles they're publishing versus at the end of the year, depending upon the relationship that's been built, they might take a different approach. And I actually didn't get a copy of what Ms. Karsten submitted, but I'm happy to review that.
You can have this one. I've read it.
I'll review that perhaps tomorrow.
I mean, should we still talk about this, or is this something that we should leave it in there? Because this has been burbling for a while, and I'm struggling with our inability, or just, what do we do? Do we go Mr. Lawrence's point and say designee, if that would help? Or do we make Mr. Lobb an assistant editor? Would that solve the problem?
Go ahead, Mr. Castillo.
I think we all know what we're trying to say, but I'm not sure we're saying it yet.
And if I'm not hearing you, I apologize.
No. But for example, as this is written, I read it to say that the principal is the editor. And it says the principal who is the editor. To me, that does place the onus on the principal. I don't think it would be bad to say the principal may delegate some or all of that role, but retains ultimate responsibility. He's subcontracting it, kind of, if you will. But I do think the policy isn't quite consistent, because the last line of the first paragraph talks about carefully considered by students and the faculty editor. So right there, all of a sudden there's this faculty editor who's crept in, even though earlier it says the principal's the editor. And so I think, again, this idea of having an operational day-to-day editor is implicit, but it may be sound to tease this out. The other question that I have there at the end of the first paragraph, it talks about material that may be considered controversial by some members of the school community, should be carefully considered, and brought to the attention of the principal. So on the one hand, it's saying it'd be good to give this a think, but it doesn't really say you have to. And then it says and brought. It doesn't say and shall or and should. So it's kind of loosey-goosey there in terms of how rigorous that scrutiny should be. And I don't know which side we want to err on, being too lax versus too stringent. But right, as written, it doesn't really provide a whole lot of guidance.
And here, the school board, the earlier policy we talked about is the school board appoints the principals and the assistant principals. That's the person who you all directly have control over, and that they report to you all and to the superintendent. So by having language that requires the faculty co-editor and the students, they should consider this and they should bring it to their attention. We don't have control over their actions. It's the principal who has responsibility for the building, who's the ultimate person who's responsible for publications that come out of their building, which is, I think, why it's the should language, and that's best practice, but it still, again, falls on the principal. As far as the faculty co-editor, I think that that's a mistake. Co-editor, under the first paragraph, it says faculty sponsors will be co-editor, and it refers to the co-editor many times, so I would recommend that we add in here and the faculty co-editor and brought to the attention of the principal so that it's consistent throughout.
But again, co-editor, is that a co-equal of the principal, or is that a lower level editor?
It's my understanding it's the student and the journalism teacher are co-editors. Final editor is the principal. Final call gets to go to the principal. Unless they delegate, if you want to add that language, I would advise against it. But it's your policy, so if that's what the majority of the school board wants to do, we can add that.
I actually would agree of advising against it, because I think ultimately it is the principal's, his role, his responsibility of what's going to be coming out in publication. If they have the relationship with the student, with the faculty advisor, co-editor, to delegate some of that out. I would be more inclined within their building, if that's what they want to do, as the two schools in Fairfax that you mentioned, how they potentially have their relationship. I'm okay with that, but I think ultimately it is incumbent upon the principal to know what's going to be, what publications are coming out of their building, what stories are coming out of, and hopefully they have the relationship with the student editor as well as that the faculty editor, that it will get brought to their attention for that. Are there other comments?
Sorry, one last question.
Mr. Lawrence?
And I'm still thinking for the second reading, I may well bring up the designee thing again, but I think we've sort of beaten that to death tonight. Just one question, under appeals to superintendent, where it says a student who does not agree with the principal's decision may appeal, is that is any student, right? Not just the writer. So Tricia, if you write something and it gets turned down and you don't feel like appealing it, but Lisa feels strongly about it, she could appeal it the way this is written, right?
As written, any student, yes.
Okay,
A student
good.
appeal.
I think that's fair. Thank you.
Mr. Castillo?
Just one last, I think maybe like a term like assistant editor could help get some gradations of editorial, but I just throw that out as another thought that occurs to me.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions for, ask for a motion for first reading? I will.
Mr. Chair, I move that the school board approve first reading of policy JP, student publications, policy GA, personal policies, goals, policy GCCB, employment of family members, policy GCDA, effective criminal conviction or founded complaint of child abuse or neglect, policy CF, school building administration, policy GEA/JOH, acceptance of electronic signatures and records, policy GCI, professional staff assignments and transfers, and policy GAH, school employee conflict of interest.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right. All those in favor?
So is this approving first reading just as drafted?
First reading with,
Without any-
I believe with some of the comments and some edits were given. I think that Ms. Minton will take and incorporate those.
I'll bring back at second reading anything, and I'll add, take away the red font that we have now, incorporate that in black. Any changes that I've noted that you all have raised, I will make in red, so it's clear at second reading what's been changed from first reading.
So I guess it's just, do we have to bake that into our motion? Or does a first reading,
Except as a friendly amendment to just the.
with such changes
I
as
didn't know
were...
if first reading implies that this is the first reading and therefore,
I think it's first reading as they've been written, as they've been submitted to the board. The second reading will incorporate the changes that we talked about today. It's my understanding in talking with Marty how this process has worked in the past is the intention is second reading is final reading. So I'm hoping to bring to you at the next school board meeting in red what the changes are, but it's my sincere hope that we can have worked out any changes, and after second reading, that's when they're adopted as written. Did that answer the question? First reading would be what was presented today without the changes. Second reading are the changes that we've discussed, then presented to you all.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, just as long as it's clear that we're not just approving these with the idea that they'll be static, but
They're dynamic, that they've been changed from today, and second reading will be
Right.
different. That's true.
And I would also encourage that any additional questions that the board members may have about any policy that they brought up, if they would talk with Ms. Minton between now and the second reading, so that we can have some of those hammered out before our next meeting.
Sure. Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
So it was moved by Ms. Gill, seconded by Mr. Nkuma. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, motion carries. All right. Next, we will move on to the 7.03 update on FLE curriculum and training for teachers, and Dr. Schiller.
As I was saying, in reference to next month's recognition of Sex Abuse Month, Awareness Month, we will be doing three things this evening. One, informing you of the fact that we'll bring forward to you as a board a resolution for next month's reading, because the board is so very much in support of sex abuse awareness, child abuse awareness, that we want you to be able to be on record along with the city along that line. Secondly, we wanted to share with you what we are doing with regard to staff training and development in this area, as well as what we are doing from a curricular perspective. Lisa, do you want to offer anything at this point, or Liz?
Ready to go.
Maybe you need to do it. It's not working for me. The right. Yep. The right one? Or just click it on the screen.
You can see the student interviews on her screen. Yep.
This one? Yep.
Oh, that took it out.
Let's change this quickly. I'm sorry.
Good? All right. Okay, I'll kick off with the quote that has resonated with me. Although teaching children about their bodies and boundaries is important, protecting children is the adult responsibility, and that education is critical to prevention. Oh, am I not? You can't hear me? Okay. You know, that is something that resonates with me because as educators, as parents, as community members, it is our responsibility to protect our students each and every day and protect our children as we move along. Tonight, as we focus on, as Dr. Schiller has shared, April is National Child Abuse Prevention Month, and although it's celebrated in April, we want to make sure that we continue education throughout the entire year. Dr. Schiller shared our areas of focus. One area that we have included is publication of information, where we're going to have a greater web presence, but we'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. Procedures and protocols. We're reviewing all of our policies, procedures, and protocols as necessary. That includes looking at our recruiting and hiring policies and procedures, which would include fingerprinting, child protective services, I-9, TB testing, including licensure, whether they have a Virginia license or an out-of-state license. Updating and making sure our reference forms include all of the information we need, and that we're asking many questions from different people, whether it's from the employer, from the references, just to make sure we get all the information that we need about the employees that we're hiring. As well as one of the things that I've done over the last week is check with surrounding school divisions to see what their background process is. And we are aligned with the surrounding school divisions, Arlington, Alexandria, Fairfax. They have the same processes as we do. We're looking at current training and making sure that we, in the area of abuse, that we really focus on and enhance what we're doing. At the beginning of the year, we have training, but we want to make sure that we look at those training for our staff and include additional areas that we want to address. One area that, as I've been working with our CERT for family life education and some of our teachers, one thing that comes up often is just boundaries, and not just boundaries for staff, but boundaries for students as well. Especially in our elementary schools, sometimes our kids just run up and hug us, and and we just need to make sure that we help kids understand that they too need to have boundaries, and that it's not necessarily a good thing to run up and hug the teacher, as well as making sure that our staff knows that when it's appropriate to, and how it's appropriate to address students. We'll be working with our administrators to update their handbooks and make sure that we've created additional information and guidelines in our staff handbooks as well as our division handbook. Our division handbook is updated every year, but we want to make sure that there's comparisons in, and that those are consistent among the division and the staff school handbooks. in terms of our volunteer clearances. Right now, we currently have a process in place where there's a form that's filled out and then the child sex offender registry is checked. We're looking at ways to make it more of an electronic background check in terms of when someone enters our building, their license is run, and then we have a check at the entry of our buildings. We think that will create a safe opportunity, more safe opportunities for people as they come in, whether it's a visitor or someone who's coming to volunteer in our buildings. We really believe that our current security who are manned at the desk would be able to handle that. So that's something that Mr. Padilla has been looking at. We also want to increase our awareness about reporting. One of the things I want to do is, and I've actually created a poster, and I won't show it to you tonight, but I've created a poster that will go in the main office, in teacher lounges, just so that staff have a reminder, as well as adults that come in have a reminder that we want to protect our students. That's just utmost, and so that anyone can call Child Protective Services if they feel like there's something going on with a student. I'll turn it to Liz for Title IX.
And just as part of the updates on policies and procedures, we are in the process of working on our Title IX policies, procedures, guidelines, roles, responsibilities, and again, Title IX deals with issues related to sexual and gender-based harassment and retaliation.
Moving into our curriculum area, the Virginia Department of Education provides family life curriculum for school divisions. In 1987, the board developed standards of learning and guidelines for a comprehensive sequential family life education curriculum K through 12, focusing on family living and community relationships. In 1997, the Board of Education said that we don't have to necessarily teach family life, but if, as a school division, we decide to teach family life, we need to use the standards of learning that are laid out for us. And as a division, we are teaching family life based on those standards. Tonight, when I share with you about the standards, it is focused on our child abuse prevention. And please note that as we move forward, it gets more explicit as the students get older as far as what's shown. Quickly, I will show you where right now what our teachers have put together in terms of the family life curriculum, and it is on our website so anyone can see it. You go to departments, you click on family life, and you will be able to see the standards that are shown from our teachers, and it tells you when it's being taught and who's teaching it. So I just want to make sure that, that the community as well as the school board is aware that we have this on our website for anyone to take a look at. When you look at the FLE standards from the VDOE, kindergarten through second grade, they're really focusing on helping students realize physical affection can be expressed with friendship, celebration, and a loving family. Also helping kids, even in kindergarten, to know when to say no if there are inappropriate touches from family members, neighbors, or strangers. As we move on third through fifth grade, it does get a little bit more explicit, demonstrating how to respond appropriately to good touches, how to handle inappropriate approaches from relatives, neighbors, strangers, or others. Also start to surround and give factors about child abuse and child neglect. And also they continue to develop ways for students to understand how to say no when they're in social behavior or activities that the student may perceive as wrong for him or herself. In 6th through 8th grade, the focus is on understanding child abuse and neglect, including emotional and sexual abuse. Explain the techniques for preventing and reporting sexual assault and molestation, and identify the effects of sexual assault, prevention of sexual assault and rape. And then 9th through 12th grade is the most explicit. They interpret the effects of prevention of sexual assault, rape, including date rape, incestuous behavior, and molestation. And then starts to talk about premarital sexual relations and so forth. And also saying no for undesirable behavior. For Falls Church, the instruction is who's responsible. It depends on the actual FLE standard. Sometimes it's our classroom teachers. It may be our physical or health education teachers, and sometimes it's our counselors. How it's being taught in K2, it's PYP units. counselor classroom, or PYP is elementary. But it could be also from our classroom visits from our counselors, programs like Second Step, through Brain Pop, YouTube, and they look heavily at Eric Erickson's stages of development in the middle school. Liz.
So next, just to share some information with you about training. And again, anytime we're thinking about training, we're always reflecting on what we've done, how we can make improvements, what we need to add. So what we have been doing is mandatory training at the beginning of the year for all staff on child abuse and neglect and procedures for reporting to CPS, and that they are mandated reporters. And what we encourage and request at our schools is if a teacher suspects something, that they go to the counselor or the administrator in the building, and so that they're making a call together and not by themselves. But they are mandated reporters. That information is reviewed at the beginning of the year. We also are required to do training for our staff on suicide and suicide prevention and signs of suicide. So again, that is done by our psychologists and social workers as part of that package at the beginning of the year for all staff to go through, and we do collect signatures and so forth. We have also wanted to focus not only on some of the mandated requirements of the training, but also providing information to our staff on protective measures, how we can focus on preventative and supportive things for our students, so that those students who may be suffering from trauma or have had a history of abuse are starting to build some resiliency skills, which are protective factors, and providing information to teachers on not only how they can build those factors in a classroom environment, but also with individual students in terms of building those relationships. So we've done some of that training. One of our psychologists is particularly interested in this area and has presented information on the professional development days at the beginning of the year, and there's been quite a bit of interest in that. So I think as we continue to look at our training, we also need to focus on what are the things we're teaching our staff to do that actually help support our students, and not just on identifying and finding the problems. We need that balance. And training on Title IX, we've started some of the training on Title IX for some staff and for some administrators. We are continuing that process. That'll be rolling out as we develop the procedures. And again, that's helping staff members know how to, what does it mean? What is sexual harassment? What is gender-based harassment? What to look for in terms of signs, what to do if they see it, for administrators, how to investigate it, how to document it, and more importantly, as I always put my student services hat on, is what supports do we put in place, what interim measures and what supports, so we make sure students feel safe at school.
One of the things that I've spoken with the social workers on adding to our training is just 5 steps for protecting our children. First, learn the facts. The first fact, 1 in 10 children are sexually abused before the age of 18. Minimize the opportunity. More than 80% of our child abuse incidents occur when a child is isolated, one-on-one situations. Talk about it. Have open conversations with children about body safety, sex, and boundaries, and the best defenses against child sexual abuse. Recognize the signs, know the signs of abuse to protect our children from further harm. Physical, behavioral, or emotional changes are things that sometimes you will note. And then to react responsibly. Understand how to respond to risky behaviors and suspicious of reports of abuse. There are 3 reasons we need to react for sexual abuse, and that's disclosure, discovery, and suspicion. And that comes from Darkness to Light website, which has been a really great resource that we've used to move us forward in our training.
Sharing with you a website called SCAN. Which is an excellent website with a lot of resources, a lot of information, both from a informational standpoint as well as from a preventative point of view. And on this website, you can find information about the Darkness into Light training that we will be doing on April 12th. April 17th, I apologize. 3-hour training for our student services staff. So we will have our student services staff first participating in this on that day. But that website is an excellent resource. We'll be linking that website in April for Child Abuse Awareness Month to our Special Education Student Services site. The focus of that website is really on the child advocacy, parent support, and then the preventative tools and community resources. So there's a lot of really helpful flyers there, questions, signs to look for, and information about training and local resources in our community.
Sorry, Liz, when you say student services staff, that includes whom?
The student services staff includes our counselors, our guidance counselors at the schools, our social workers, and our psychologists.
Okay, thank you.
So moving forward, what are we looking forward to in terms of April and recognizing this important month? We will be sharing some information with principals for them to share with the community in their principal newsletters. So I'll probably put together some information that I'd like them to distribute when they send out their newsletters for April. We are working on an informational flyer. We have one already at the high school that we developed around suicide kinds of signs. We're working on one that's utilizing a lot of the information from the SCAN website and we hope from the Darkness to Light, so that we'll have that on probably the George Mason website and also on the Student Services site. As well as the other school sites. I've already spoken with John Brett about working with him to get this information up, and then we'll push it out and link it in human resources, in morning announcements, and then also I can distribute and push things out through MailChimp and some of our other distribution mechanisms. So we want to focus on the child abuse because it is National Child Abuse Awareness Month, but we also want to have a little bit more information about resiliency, mental health issues, and suicide prevention. We have had some of our staff members, some student services staff, and some of our teacher staff and administrators attend the mental health first aid training. Those are ongoing trainings that help individuals look for signs when students may be in distress and having some issues. And what we know is any student experiencing trauma or abuse is more at risk for having those kinds of mental health needs. So again, trying to train and educate our staff on a variety of fronts so that they are kind of the people that see the kids and can know what to look for and know who to go to get some additional support.
Again, as I shared earlier, we'll be displaying posters in our buildings about mandated reporting. We'll continue to deal with education and training of our staff members. Teachers and counselors will look for additional resources to use to support their curriculum, especially at the elementary level. We're looking at working with them to create some additional materials, and then we'll work with the Health and Wellness Advisory, which is a school board advisory committee, to identify community outreach and resources needed for our community. And then we've listed a few resources that will be on our website, our FCCPS website, as well as we'll try to get them on our school websites as well. That's all we have for you tonight. Are there any questions or things more that you'd like us to do?
Are there any questions? Mr. Lawrence?
Sorry, it's my night. When you talk about the training in September for all FCCPS staff, all means what? Does that go from, people in accounting in central office to every single teacher, or who?
It's done in all of our buildings. And central office, we have brief training as well, yes.
Okay. And what about people who come in after that?
Like
So
coming
if somebody-
mid-year?
Yeah, I mean, if somebody comes in as a teacher or a sub in November, I mean, what do they get? Because it's not just wait till next September, I assume.
We do have information. We have a substitute handbook, so some information is in there. That is something that we can look into, is having, we oftentimes look for videos and things that we can have people watch. So that's something that we need to look further into.
Okay. For the September training, if we have people we know are, regular subs that have been subs for years and years and years, it seems like we've got, are they also allowed to come or asked to come, encouraged to come in September?
they are not asked or encouraged. I mean, some of them may be there, especially if it's a long-term sub situation. But
Okay.
we don't necessarily reach out to subs to come during the first.
Would there be any
first
reason
week.
not to
No,
consider that?
No, there isn't any reason. I think what may be a better thing to do is to have it be a component of our onboarding process for all of our new hires, so that when they come in, when they're filling out their tax paperwork, that they have certain requirements that they need to do in addition to just filling those paperwork.
Right, well, that was the question about anybody after September, so.
That
yeah,
is
it
one of
should
the
be-
things that I found from other school divisions. Prince William happens to be one that has a lot of training as people are onboarding, so we're going to be looking at what they do and how they do it.
And just to answer, with regard to the suicide training, this year, for the first year, we used an online set of training, which actually went beyond just suicide, so it provided additional information on mental health for staff, and we ran it through Edivation. So any new staff member coming in, principals really would have to make sure they went on and did that and had their certificate printed so that we had a tracking system. So that particular training, we have moved to an online system. The CPS one, we've still been doing it in person. We find, our social workers have said they find that people have questions. So the issue of new hires is a separate issue, but the face-to-face questions and some of the conversations that come up with that, they have found to be better provided in a discussion format versus just an online review.
Oh, yeah, I mean, face-to-face is always better, but we just need to make sure that, it's not just September, and if somebody is new, it's part of the onboarding, the abuse, neglect, suicide, the entire thing. So, yeah, I think as long as you're moving in that direction. And finally, how do we get the word out to parents about what you just showed? What we teach kids at what levels?
I mean, it will be on, this PowerPoint will be on board docs. We can have John put it out in morning announcements as well. Hopefully, once we are able to get a greater web presence on the website, that will be another area, but we can definitely do it through morning announcements. We can even have our principals during the April timeframe also put it in their newsletters.
Okay, yeah, because, I mean, honestly, let's face it, we all love board docs, but I don't know many parents who go trolling on that for fun. So I think we should just make it clear to the parents what their kids are being taught about this kind of thing and how it is age appropriate and, it is thought out.
And they actually, every year there is an opt-out for Family Life, so they do get information every year about when it's being taught and if they want to opt out. So they should be getting notifications every year that we're teaching Family Life.
Right, but I guess then it's on them to say, well, what are you teaching? If I want to decide to opt out, I want to look at it first, or are they basically told, this is what we're teaching, take a look at it?
I'm not sure what the actual letter looks like. I can get that information for you, but it's our CERT. Vicki Gallagher works with our teachers and our PE and health educators to make sure that goes out every year.
Okay,
I'd have
yeah,
to
I just
look at
think
the
we should
actual
make
letter.
it
Yeah.
as easy as possible for parents to know, because it's one thing to say you can opt out, but then if they have to come back and say, well, what am I opting out of? What are you teaching?
And we can also make sure that it's a link, do it electronic, again, through morning announcements. That seems to be a really good way for us to disseminate information oftentimes.
Yeah, okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you both very much. That was a very helpful presentation. I wanted to ask a little bit more about the child abuse prevention part of the discussion. I think to what sorts of campaigns have been the most effective in other areas, and most recently I think about see something, say something, right? And you can't take an Amtrak train, you can't ride the New York City subway without seeing that messaging that if you see something, it's important to talk about it. It may be nothing, but err on the side of letting people know so that you make sure something bad doesn't happen. So to that end, I like the proposals that you've got about doing additional training. I really love the idea of the posters in all the rooms, so it's really clear that, here are the reporting channels. I'm just wondering if there are, and I don't know how the answer, but if there's it feels to me like this is a subject that we need to talk about so it becomes less uncomfortable to talk about. And that, to me, means we need some innovative ways to make sure the procedures are out there, make kids and teachers and parents all aware without being unduly afraid, just aware. And I'm not an expert in this area. I wonder if there are other things that we might do in addition to the things that you've got, whether we could have a cadence and try to do, something in the fall, something in the winter, something in the spring. And so we're not just focused on September and April. And I know with the posters and things like that, we wouldn't be, but it's helpful to sometimes have some milestones around that. And I guess what occurs to me is this a subject we'd like maybe the Health and Wellness Committee to do some brainstorming about to see if they've got any ideas that we could take up to make sure that the kids in our school system are as protected as possible.
I also just mentioned that the Alliance for Youth Committee is also focused on this issue and actually was the first group to kind of look into the darkness into light and look at that and, what's going on in the community. So we've got at least one advisory committee and one other committee, which is more of a community-based committee with school representation, community representation, people from mental health, et cetera, looking at it broadly.
Any other comments or questions? I would like to thank you all both for the presentation tonight as well. I think you all do have some good things to make sure that we do all we can to educate and train our teachers, to help our students to know that, if there is something happening, for them to know who to go to and report those things, and for them not to feel afraid to be able to go to make those reports. And I agree with Mr. Reitinger, if we can look at some potential other ways to make sure that we enhance those things for our students, to make sure that we prioritize their protection at all times in our schools, I would greatly appreciate that. All right. Thank you both very much.
You want to stay here for the closed session instead of?
Yeah, I think we're going to just go back.
I think we sit someplace. Yeah, we'll do that next, but I just wasn't sure whether to stay here or down here.
We'll go back. We're going to do a slight adjustment to. Okay, excuse me. Yeah, sorry. And we'll go 7.04, the funding for the special education, and I'll turn that over to Dr. Schiller.
Essentially, we've shared with you what the scope of the study would be, and that if we're able to get your approval, we could initiate having this consultant be on site the last week of April. The scope of the study would be comprehensive. It'll also include community forums, surveys, interviews, select group forums, and look at all of the areas that we want to make sure that we are totally in compliance with what's required, that the program services are the best that we can offer, and processes and laws, everything that we want to do are followed, and the appropriate kind of staff training and ongoing staff development is in effect. And the hope would be that the comprehensive report will be delivered to us as a deliverable in the month of latter part of May. It'll be able to provide the board and its superintendent with direction and plenty of time to put whatever is necessary into place for the next school year and to guide any development for your next year's budget. I would strongly urge you to consider and approve the resolution put before you.
Thank you, Dr. Schiller. Are there any questions? Mr. Lawrence?
Sorry, just a couple. This was run past, I assume, obviously Liz Germer, the Director of Special Ed, was this also showed to, as a draft to the Special Ed Advisory Committee to ask for any of their comments? I mean, I realize they only meet once a month, so it may not align.
I have not. I apologize. It's just off cycle there.
Okay. Okay. My other question is on the first task where it says identify how the district is providing proactive preventive services for struggling students. Does that, for a consultant, would that also mean identify where we're not?
Yes, what the report would focus on is what is industry best practices, where are the shortcomings, and recommendations for how to address the shortcomings, and also any commendations where in order, as well as an implementation plan.
Okay, so it wouldn't just be looking at what we're doing well, it would also be looking at what we're not doing as well as
Most
we
importantly is room for improvement.
Right. Okay, so that would be understood.
Throughout, that's part of the methodology of what the deliverables would be included.
Okay. No, it was just everywhere else it's evaluate, and there it was identified. That was my basic concern. Evaluate to me means look at both sides, tell us the good and the bad. Identify
I can change that word.
Okay, all right, thank you. That's it for me.
Mr. Ryan? Mr. Ryan?
I'd like to commend the school system, the special education staff, and the interested parties for suggesting we do this. I think it's a valuable expenditure of money. We discovered last year with the ESOL audit that it's always useful to get a third party to look at what you're doing and identify places where you can improve. And it makes the case for stronger budget investments if you need stronger budget investments. So this makes a lot of sense to me. I'm very pleased to strongly support the idea of conducting a special education study. I'd like to note that I think with regard to the cycle and whether it can be run by SPEAC or not, that would be good if it could be done, or even if not at a meeting, just from informal comments from members. But the motion that we have before us is to approve a transfer of $15,000 from the contingency fund. So I don't think the administration's asking us to approve the particular wording of the statement of work. It's just that a special education study will be conducted as rapidly as possible on the schedule that you've identified. And so putting aside $15,000, given the growth in special education needs, the increasing special education population we've got, and the value of bringing in third-party expertise to make sure that we're doing everything we do as well as possible, it's an easy case for me. So I think it's a very good proposal.
Any other questions or comments? All right. If not, I also agree that this is an expenditure well worth the cost, that it will help us to identify and work towards making what we already do within this very specialized population, make what we do even better for those students and those families of those students. And so with that, I will take a motion, please.
Mr. Chair, I move that the FCCPS School Board approve a 2016-2017 fund transfer in the amount of $15,000 from its operating contingency, paren 672005.9401, close paren, to special education purchase services, open paren 611-0025.3120, close paren, for the purpose of contracting a study at FCCPS special education program.
Is there a second? Second. Okay. All right. All those in favor, please signify by aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All right, so back to where I was really saying, we're going to make a slight adjustment to the agenda, and we're going to do the closed portion of it meeting first, which should only take
We're not sure.
not a super long time, but we will have the Mount Daniel conversation. But this is something I think we need to have the conversation first with our legal counsel, and then we'll come back with the the other portion of it. So will someone please read us into to close?
Mr. Chair, do we need to?
Oh, or can so if I can entertain a motion to amend the agenda to move the closed session now to 7.05 and then the 7.0, what is it?
Mr. Chair, I would move to take item 7.05 on the agenda, Mount Daniel Project and CIP, and move it to a new item 10, and then renumber all subsequent items, future agenda items being item 11, Superintendent's Report item 12, and so on.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
Sit down.
Yeah, go ahead.
Pursuant to the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, I move that the board convene a closed meeting for the following purpose: to discuss or consider the identified subject matter. Legal matters under Section 2.23711A7, in particular, consultation with legal counsel and briefings by staff members pertaining to actual or probable litigation where such consultation or briefing would adversely affect the negotiating or litigating posture of the public body.
Is there a second? Mr. Castillo?
Mr. Ankuma?
Aye.
Mr. Castillo? Ms. Gill? Mr. Lawrence? Mr. Reitinger?
Yes.
Ms. Ward? And Mr. Webb?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, I move that we reconvene in open session.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. If someone would certify.
Here, I got it. Whereas the Falls Church City Public School Board has convened a closed meeting on this date pursuant to an affirmative recorded vote and in accordance with the provisions of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, and whereas Section 2.2-377B of the Code of Virginia requires a certification by the school board that such closed meeting was conducted in conformity with Virginia law. Now therefore be it resolved that the Falls Church City Public School Board hereby certifies that to the best of each member's knowledge, one, only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirement by Virginia law were discussed in the closed meeting to which the certification applies, and two, only such public business matters as were identified in the motion convening the closed meeting were heard, discussed, or considered.
Second.
Mr. Ankuma?
Aye.
Mr. Castillo?
Aye.
Ms. Gill?
Aye.
Mr. Lawrence? Mr. Reitinger?
Yes.
And Mr. Webb?
Yes.
Thank you.
So I want to ask the board, with the transition of, do we still want to Mount Daniel Project CIP conversation?
Mr. Chair, I would move that we strike the Mount Daniel CIP discussion from the agenda.
Is there a second?
Second.
With all due apologies to anybody who's sitting there waiting for it.
We very sincerely apologize for you being freezing in here for this. All those with the moves by Mr. Castillo, second by Mr. Ankuma. All in favor, signify saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Moving on, we are. All right, are there any future agenda items?
I would still ask that if we could get a list of what we've talked about already as future agenda items, that'd be great, but
Okay.
not for tonight.
All right, we can do that. Superintendent report?
I'll defer to the next board meeting.
Thank you very much. Any board liaison reports?
None to share.
Dale would like for us to go ahead and approve.
Yes.
I believe Mr. Gill would like us to go ahead and approve the minutes. So if we ask for unanimous consent to approve the list of minutes that are here on the agenda. All right, so move on. And any enrollment updates? If not, this one will defer to the next meeting. And with that, we are adjourned.